Welcome to an exploration of one of the most unsettling cases ever documented in the state of Missouri. Before we begin, I invite you to share in the comments exactly where you're tuning in from and the precise moment you're hearing this narration. We're genuinely curious to learn in which locations and at what hours of the day or night these recorded accounts find their audience. The year was 1867. It had been merely 2 years since the American Civil War concluded, leaving the nation wounded and on a difficult path to recovery. In the isolated and rugged hills of the Missouri Ozarks, most people were simply focused on piecing their lives back together. The roads of that era were primitive, hardly more than dirt trails carved through the wilderness, linking small, scattered communities. For those traveling, navigating these hills could consume days, and discovering a safe place to shelter after sunset was considered a true blessing. On one such route, positioned roughly 17 miles northeast of Springfield in Webster County, there stood a modest cabin that numerous travelers recalled passing by. Though it appeared on no maps, it was known locally as the Stillwell Place, named for the two brothers who had taken up residence there around 1863. Set back from the roadway about 50 yards and partly hidden by a cluster of oak trees, the cabin displayed a small, hand-painted sign that offered a simple promise: water and rest for weary travelers. The Stillwell brothers, Elias, the elder at 37, and Jeremiah, 34, had a reputation for providing access to water from their well, and on occasion, a meal or a spot to sleep for those journeying through. They were generally reclusive, though they would make periodic trips into the nearby town of Marshfield to procure supplies. Neighbors characterized them as quiet individuals who never stirred up any trouble. The brothers had come to the area amidst the upheaval of the war, and, as was common with many who surfaced in those disorderly times, few questioned their history or where they had come from. On December 12, 1867, a postal carrier by the name of Thomas Weston was traveling his route through Webster County when a heavy snowfall commenced. Based on the statement he subsequently provided to county officials, he looked for refuge at the Stillwell cabin, a place he had stopped at twice previously. What he encountered there would trigger one of the most harrowing investigations in Ozark history. Despite initial scrutiny, it would ultimately remain categorized as an unresolved cold case for nearly 100 years. Presented here is a documented account pieced together from county records, newspaper stories from the Springfield, Missouri Weekly Patriot, personal testimonies, and evidence gathered by the Webster County Sheriff's Department during 1867 and 1868. A portion of these records was later rediscovered in 1952 during a courthouse renovation, providing further details once believed to be lost. As the winter of 1867 descended upon the Ozarks, no one harbored suspicions that the Stillwell brothers had been offering travelers something far more sinister than water. Their hospitality concealed dark secrets that would haunt Webster County across generations. Thomas Weston's postal route took him through some of the most secluded sections of the county. At 31, he was well accustomed to the rigors of the trail, having previously served as a scout in the war. That December afternoon, the snow was falling intensely, severely limiting visibility. He later testified that he nearly missed the turn leading to the Stillwell Place, only noticing it when his horse abruptly halted near the path. In his report, Weston stated that the cabin appeared somehow different. No smoke rose from the chimney despite the freezing temperatures, and no lantern was lit in the window as there usually was. He advanced with caution, observing an absence of fresh footprints in the snow, which he found peculiar. The Stillwells rarely ventured off their land during the winter months. Weston recounted that he called out multiple times before attempting the door, discovering it was unlocked. Inside, it was dark and unusually frigid. A partially eaten meal rested on the table, the food solidified by frost. The fireplace held nothing but cold ashes. What struck Weston most, according to his account, was the silence. It was the kind of profound quiet that makes a man's ears ring, he recorded. A thorough search of the cabin yielded no indication of the brothers. Their coats continued to hang by the entrance. Their rifles remained positioned above the fireplace. It gave the impression they had simply evaporated in the midst of a meal. Troubled and bewildered, Weston resolved to push on to Marshfield, despite the deteriorating weather, to inform Sheriff James Harrington of his finding. At first, the assumptions were straightforward. Perhaps the brothers had gone hunting and been caught unprepared by the storm. Maybe they had relatives close by they'd decided to visit. But something regarding the abandoned meal unsettled the sheriff sufficiently that he organized a search party the following day. What they uncovered, or more precisely what they failed to uncover, signaled the start of a mystery that would only intensify over time. The Stillwell brothers had first appeared in Webster County during the summer of 1863, a period when the war had transformed the Ozarks into a lawless frontier. Missouri, as a border state with split loyalties, experienced some of the conflict's most brutal guerrilla fighting. In the midst of this chaos, two brothers buying land and constructing a cabin attracted little attention. According to land documents recovered in 1952, Elias and Jeremiah Stillwell acquired their property from a widow named Margaret Holloway, whose husband had perished at the Battle of Wilson's Creek. They paid using gold coins, an unusual enough detail to be noted in the deed. The brothers claimed they were from Kentucky, though they provided scant further information about their past. In a journal discovered among her personal effects after her death in 1881, Martha Simmons, who operated the general store in Marshfield at the time, shared her recollections of the brothers. She wrote that the Stillwell men largely kept to themselves but were always proper in their transactions. She noted that Jeremiah, the younger, had a nervous manner, constantly watching the door. It was Elias who did most of the talking for them. She recorded that they would purchase significant quantities of coffee, salt, and other preserving agents. When asked, Elias would explain they smoked meat to last through the winter, though she never observed them buying much livestock. The brothers soon built a reputation for providing clean water to travelers. Their well, excavated more deeply than most in the vicinity, delivered cool, clear water even during dry periods. Within a year, they had added a modest lean-to where travelers could find rest if necessary. By 1865, they were occasionally providing meals for a small charge or in exchange for trade goods. Jacob Miller, a cattle driver who frequently traveled that road, provided a statement in January 1868 that offered insight into the brothers' operation. He mentioned they typically had stew available, a hearty sort of fare, and claimed they hunted their own meat. He never observed them doing much farming, though they maintained a small garden. Elias would engage in conversation while Jeremiah saw to the horses or fetched water. Looking back, Miller couldn't recall ever encountering other travelers there during his stops, though the brothers spoke of having many visitors. The Stillwells seemed to embody the frontier hospitality essential for survival in such remote regions. Their setup was unpretentious, yet provided a welcome break for those traversing the difficult road connecting Springfield to points northeast. Nothing in their observed conduct suggested anything amiss. However, after the brothers vanished, a comprehensive search of their land would expose unsettling inconsistencies in the peaceful image they had fostered. Sheriff Harrington's search party reached the Stillwell property on December 13, 1867. The snow had ceased, leaving 8 inches of pristine white covering the terrain. The group of 6 men, which included the sheriff and Thomas Weston, meticulously inspected the cabin and its surroundings. The official report, submitted to the county clerk and rediscovered during the 1952 renovation, detailed what they found. It noted no signs of struggle inside the dwelling. The brothers' personal effects looked untouched. A ledger book was discovered unusually hidden beneath a floorboard under Elias Stillwell's bed. This book contained names, dates, and cryptic notations regarding value received, though its meaning wasn't clear. Some pages had apparently been torn out. This ledger would become a pivotal piece of evidence, though its full importance wasn't instantly recognized. It contained 37 entries spanning from October 1863 to November 1867, each listing a name, date, and enigmatic notes about items of value. Certain entries were simply marked with an X. The search was then extended to the property's outbuildings, which included a small barn, a smokehouse, and a storage cellar excavated into the hillside behind the cabin. Inside the barn, they found a single mule and indications that at least 2 horses were now absent. The smokehouse contained several cuts of meat, which the searchers initially presumed to be venison or pork. However, it was the cellar that yielded the first genuinely disturbing discovery. Sheriff Harrington's report described it as follows: a root cellar extending approximately 15 feet into the hillside. Wooden shelves held preserved goods consistent with typical household provisions. However, the rear wall appeared to have been recently dug out, revealing a narrow passage. This tunnel extended another 27 feet, ending in a chamber roughly 8 feet by 10 feet. This chamber contained numerous personal effects, watches, rings, clothing items, and papers, all seemingly belonging to various individuals. Most troubling was the discovery of 32 pairs of boots and shoes in a range of sizes, some heavily worn, others nearly new. The sheer volume of personal items was extensive enough to indicate they had been accumulated over several years. None matched any known possessions of the Stillwell brothers. The implication was unmistakable. These belongings had likely been taken from others, presumably travelers who had stopped at the cabin. Yet, no bodies were found, no blood evidence, nothing to definitively prove violence had occurred. The most incriminating evidence remained circumstantial. Why would the brothers maintain a hidden chamber filled with strangers' belongings? The search party broadened their efforts, scouring the adjacent woods and checking the well, but the deep snow hampered their progress. Sheriff Harrington gave orders to seal the property and station guards to prevent any tampering with potential evidence, while he went back to Marshfield to arrange a more exhaustive investigation. Word quickly disseminated across the county. The mysterious vanishing of the Stillwell brothers, paired with the discovery of the secret chamber, created a sensation. On December 17, 1867, the Springfield, Missouri Weekly Patriot ran a front-page story bearing the headline, "Strange Disappearance in Webster County, Foul Play Suspected." As winter's hold tightened on the Ozarks, residents started recalling details about the Stillwell brothers that had previously seemed trivial but now took on a more sinister light. Throughout the winter of 1867–68, the Stillwell cabin remained empty and silent. Sheriff Harrington had it locked and kept under regular patrol, though few locals ventured near the property once rumors began circulating. The investigation persisted despite seasonal challenges, with Harrington interviewing anyone who had interacted with the brothers. A more thorough examination of the ledger recovered from beneath the floorboards provided the first substantial clues. Each entry adhered to a pattern, a name, a date, a notation regarding items of value, such as watches, coins, a fine coat, and occasionally specifics about a destination. Entries marked with an X included an additional note concerning the quality of the goods. The last entry, dated November 29, 1867, read, "J. Hammond, Springfield Merchant, Gold Timepiece, $37 notes, quality goods, X." Sheriff Harrington cross-referenced these names with missing persons reports and identified several matches. Joseph Hammond, a Springfield merchant, had indeed been reported missing by his family after he failed to come back from a business trip to St. Louis in late November. Similarly, William Cooper, listed in an entry from July 1867, had disappeared while traveling to visit relatives in Springfield. The implications of these matches were deeply troubling, though they remained circumstantial. Without bodies or witnesses, establishing that the Stillwell brothers were involved in these disappearances remained a challenge. Throughout January and February of 1868, Sheriff Harrington painstakingly compiled a list of all travelers reported missing along routes near the Stillwell property. The list ultimately contained 23 names, dating as far back as late 1863, shortly after the brothers had settled in the area. One name on the list proved especially significant. Reverend Michael Donovan, a circuit preacher known for traveling throughout the Ozarks, had disappeared in April 1866 while journeying from Springfield to Lebanon. His name appeared in the ledger with the notation, "Men of cloth, silver cross, few coins, books of no value, X." Reverend Donovan's congregation in Lebanon had conducted extensive searches when he failed to arrive, but no trace of him was ever located. The discovery of his name in the ledger prompted a renewed search focused specifically on the areas surrounding the Stillwell property. On February 23, 1868, during a brief thaw, Sheriff Harrington's deputies uncovered a shallow grave approximately half a mile from the cabin, concealed within a thicket of brambles. The grave contained the remains of a man wearing the tattered remnants of clerical clothing. The silver cross mentioned in the ledger entry was notably absent. The discovery of Reverend Donovan's remains provided the first concrete evidence that the Stillwell brothers had been involved in at least one disappearance. However, the condition of the remains raised troubling questions. According to Dr. Hayes's examination notes, the body exhibited evidence of extensive post-mortem processing. Flesh had been removed from the majority of bones with a precision suggesting anatomical knowledge. Long bones were broken at the ends in a manner consistent with marrow extraction. This grim finding pointed to something far more disturbing than simple robbery and murder. It hinted at practices so depraved that even hardened frontier lawmen were hesitant to consider the implications. In March 1868, once the ground had thawed sufficiently for more extensive digging, Sheriff Harrington organized a thorough search of the property. County records indicate that 20 men participated, systematically excavating areas around the cabin, barn, and cellar. What they uncovered was described in clinical terms in the official report, but newspaper accounts were more explicit. The Springfield, Missouri Weekly Patriot's March 19, 1868 edition reported a grim discovery at Stillwell Farm, with human remains unearthed. According to the official record, investigators located human remains in 3 distinct areas on the property: in a deep pit behind the barn, scattered in the wooded area approximately 200 yards northwest of the cabin, and, most disturbingly, sealed within the walls of the smokehouse. Forensic science in 1868 was primitive. But Dr. William Hayes, the county physician who examined the remains, estimated they belonged to at least 7 different individuals. His notes, preserved in the county archives, indicate that some bones showed evidence of being processed with tools similar to those used in butchering animals. The most damning evidence emerged from the smokehouse. Among the hanging meats that the search party had initially assumed to be venison or pork, Dr. Hayes identified cuts that were unmistakably human in origin. His report states simply that certain preserved meats appeared to be of human derivation, prepared in a manner suggesting knowledge of anatomy and preservation techniques. The implications were horrifying. The Stillwell brothers had apparently been killing travelers, taking their valuables, and, most unthinkably, processing their remains as food, which they then served to subsequent travelers who stopped at their cabin. Yet, the brothers themselves were still missing. No trace of Elias or Jeremiah Stillwell was found during the search, leaving investigators to wonder if they had fled or perhaps met with violence themselves. The abandoned meal on their table remained an unexplained detail. In April 1868, the case took another turn when a man named Theodore Palmer came forward with information. Palmer, a trapper who frequently worked the remote areas of the county, claimed to have encountered Jeremiah Stillwell on December 11, 1867, the day before the brothers' disappearance was discovered. In his affidavit, Palmer stated he was checking his lines up near Beaver Creek, maybe 5 miles north of their place, when he saw a man on horseback leading another horse with a bundle tied to it. He recognized him as the younger Stillwell brother. He seemed to be in a hurry and didn't stop to talk as he normally would, simply nodding and continuing north. Palmer didn't think much of it until he heard about them going missing. Palmer's statement suggested that at least Jeremiah Stillwell had left the property deliberately, taking provisions with him. This contradicted the scene at the cabin with its half-eaten meal and abandoned personal items. Had Jeremiah fled while Elias remained? Had Elias been a victim of his own brother? Or was there some other explanation for the seemingly contradictory evidence? Sheriff Harrington expanded the search to areas north of the county, sending telegrams to authorities in neighboring regions with descriptions of the Stillwell brothers. No confirmed sightings were reported. As the investigation proceeded through the spring and summer of 1868, more details emerged about the brothers' background, or lack thereof. Attempts to trace their claimed Kentucky origins proved fruitless. No records of Elias or Jeremiah Stillwell could be located in Kentucky or surrounding states. Their past before arriving in Webster County remained a complete blank. This absence of verifiable history raised the possibility that Stillwell was an assumed name, perhaps adopted to obscure a criminal past elsewhere. Sheriff Harrington sent inquiries to law enforcement in multiple states, seeking information about similar crimes or suspects matching the brothers' descriptions. Another discovery added to the growing body of evidence against them. In the hidden chamber where personal belongings had been found, investigators located a small journal wedged behind a loose stone in the wall. The journal, apparently belonging to Jeremiah Stillwell, contained entries dating from 1864 to 1866. Most entries were mundane notes about weather or chores, but several contained disturbing references. One entry from August 1864 read, "He says the stew needs more salt. Travelers don't notice any difference. Sometimes I wonder if they suspect. The well keeps our secret." Another dated April 1865 stated, "3 men today, Army deserters." He said too risky, but they had good boots and a fine rifle. No one will look for them. Use the special herbs in their coffee. These cryptic entries suggested not only that the brothers had been killing travelers for years, but that they had developed methods to incapacitate their victims, possibly using poison. The reference to the well was particularly disturbing, hinting that evidence might be hidden there. Sheriff Harrington ordered the well to be drained and examined. The task proved difficult and dangerous, with the well extending over 60 feet into the limestone beneath the property. When workers finally reached the bottom, they found a layer of silt and debris approximately 3 feet deep. Among the items recovered from the well were numerous small bones later identified as finger and toe bones, several teeth, buttons, a gold wedding band inscribed with the initials MH to JH, 1858, and a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be human hair of various colors tied with thread into neat bundles. Dr. Hayes examined these findings and concluded that the well had likely been used to dispose of certain remains that were not processed for other purposes. His report noted that the preservation of these items suggested they had been in the well for varying lengths of time, some possibly as long as 3 years. The discovery in the well provided further evidence of the brothers' crimes, but still left many questions unanswered. The most pressing remained, what had happened to Elias and Jeremiah Stilwell? By August 1868, with no further leads and the brothers still missing, the active investigation began to wind down. Sheriff Harrington maintained that the case remained open, but resources were redirected to more pressing matters. The Stilwell property, considered a scene of horrific crimes, remained abandoned. The county, unable to legally dispose of it without resolution regarding its owners. The story of the Stilwell brothers and their gruesome hospitality quickly entered local folklore. Parents warned children to be wary of strangers offering food or shelter. Travelers through the area gave the property a wide berth, crossing themselves as they passed. The cabin itself began to deteriorate, vegetation gradually reclaiming the cleared land around it. For almost a century, the case would remain officially unsolved, though locals had little doubt about the brothers' guilt. The question of their fate, however, continued to provoke speculation and debate. Some believed they had escaped justice, fleeing to the Western Territories or perhaps even overseas. Others theorized that they had fallen victim to one of their intended targets, a traveler who had discovered their true nature and turned the tables on his would-be killers. A third theory, whispered rather than spoken aloud, suggested that the brothers had ultimately turned on each other, their partnership dissolving into murderous conflict. This theory gained some support from the scene at the cabin. The half-eaten meal and abandoned belongings hinted at a sudden and unexpected end to their operation. Whatever the truth, the Stilwell brothers and their terrible crimes faded into history, becoming just another dark legend of the Ozark Hills. For decades, the case remained closed but unsolved. The brothers' fate unknown and their victims largely forgotten. The Stilwell case might have remained merely a dark footnote in Ozark history if not for Clarence Thornton, a history professor at Missouri State University, then Southwest Missouri State College, who developed an interest in unsolved crimes of the region. In 1952, while researching for a book on frontier justice, Thornton requested access to Webster County's archived records. During a renovation of the Webster County Courthouse that same year, workers discovered a sealed compartment in the basement containing documents thought lost in a fire in 1892. Among these were additional records relating to the Stilwell case, including detailed inventories of items found in the hidden chamber and several photographs taken at the scene, some of the earliest crime scene photography in Missouri history. The photographs, though deteriorated, showed the cabin interior, the excavated tunnel, and the collection of personal items. One particularly unsettling image captured the smokehouse interior with its hanging meats, taken before their true nature was discovered. The clinical detachment of the black and white image somehow made it more disturbing when viewed with the knowledge of what it actually depicted. Thornton also uncovered correspondence between Sheriff Harrington and authorities in other states that hadn't been included in the official case file. Most significantly, he found a letter from the sheriff of Daviess County, Kentucky, responding to Harrington's inquiries about the Stilwell brothers. The letter, dated June 3, 1868, stated that while there was no record of Stilwell brothers as described, a case from 1861 bore similar patterns. Brothers Ezekiel and Joshua Hartley had disappeared following accusations of grave robbing and customer poisoning at their roadside tavern. Descriptions matched the suspects, with Ezekiel now approximately 37 and Joshua 34. Both were known for an unusual interest in anatomy and preservation methods. Joshua had worked briefly as an assistant to a local doctor before being dismissed for unspecified misconduct. This connection suggested the Stillwell brothers had likely been the Hartleys, who had changed their identities and relocated to Missouri during the chaos of the Civil War. Their pattern of predatory behavior had apparently begun earlier and in another state, adding a new dimension to the case. Further research by Thornton uncovered additional details about the Hartley brothers. Newspaper archives from Kentucky revealed that the brothers had operated a small tavern called Hartley's Rest on a road between Owensboro and Hartford from 1858 to 1861. The establishment had gained a reputation for serving unusually flavorful stews and meat pies, drawing travelers despite its remote location. In early 1861, suspicions arose when the local cemetery reported evidence of grave tampering. Around the same time, several travelers who had stopped at Hartley's Rest were reported missing by their families. Local authorities began an investigation, but before they could question the brothers thoroughly, Ezekiel and Joshua Hartley disappeared, abandoning their tavern overnight. The parallels to the Stillwell case were striking: brothers operating a roadside establishment catering to travelers, unexplained disappearances, and a sudden vanishing act when suspicions arose. The physical descriptions and ages matched as well, supporting the theory that the Hartleys had reinvented themselves as the Stillwells and continued their predatory activities in Missouri. Thornton published his findings in the Journal of Ozark Studies in 1953, bringing renewed attention to the long-cold case. His article, Serving More Than Water: The Stillwell Brothers' Reign of Terror, presented the most complete account of the case to date, incorporating both the original investigation and his own discoveries. Following Thornton's publication, an elderly woman named Sarah Wilkes contacted him with a story passed down in her family. Her grandfather, James Wilkes, had been a member of Sheriff Harrington's search party in 1868. According to family lore, the search had uncovered more than was officially reported. In her letter to Thornton, she wrote that her grandfather wouldn't speak of it much, but on his deathbed in 1911, he told her father about a hidden room they found beneath the cabin floor. He said it contained what he called instruments of torture and a chair with restraints. Sheriff Harrington ordered them not to include it in reports to spare the families of the missing. Grandfather said he never slept right after what he saw there. This account, while impossible to verify independently, aligned with certain inconsistencies in the official records. Several pages appeared to be missing from the inventory of items found on the property, with numbering that jumped from page 7 to page 11. Whether these pages were intentionally removed or lost to time remains unknown. Thornton's research also uncovered a curious detail about the brothers' disappearance. The abandoned meal on their table had included 2 plates, yet evidence suggested a third person had been present. A third chair at the table was pulled out, and a partial footprint in spilled stew was of a different size than either brother's known footwear. This led to speculation that the brothers might have been interrupted during a meal by someone who then either killed them or forced them to flee. But who this third person might have been and what their connection to the brothers was remained a mystery. Thornton's work inspired others to investigate the case. Amateur historians and true crime enthusiasts began combing through newspaper archives and county records across the Midwest, looking for any trace of the Stillwell/Hartley brothers or similar crimes that might be connected to them. In 1954, a librarian in Jefferson City discovered a newspaper article from the St. Louis, Missouri Republican dated January 18, 1862, describing the arrest of 2 brothers named Harlow for suspicious behavior and possession of personal effects not their own. The brothers were held briefly but released due to lack of evidence. The physical description matched the Stillwell/Hartley brothers, suggesting they may have adopted multiple identities during their criminal career. Another researcher found records from a small town in southern Illinois indicating that 2 brothers named Stillman had operated a boarding house there for approximately 6 months in early 1863 before abruptly departing following the disappearance of a guest. Again, the descriptions matched, hinting at a pattern of movement and identity changes as the brothers stayed one step ahead of suspicion. These discoveries painted a picture of the brothers as calculating predators who had refined their methods over time, learning from each close call and becoming more careful with each new identity. By the time they established themselves in Webster County as the Stillwells, they had apparently developed a system that allowed them to prey on travelers for years without detection. In 1955, construction workers clearing land for a new highway approximately 12 miles north of the former Stillwell property made a grim discovery. While excavating a hillside, they unearthed human remains buried in a shallow grave. The remains, examined by the medical examiner, were determined to be those of a male in his 30s who had died approximately 80 to 90 years earlier. The cause of death was clear: a single gunshot wound to the back of the skull. With the remains was a pocket watch with the initials ES engraved on the inside of the case. This led investigators to believe they had found Elias Stillwell, apparently murdered and buried far from the cabin he had shared with his brother. The location aligned with Theodore Palmer's 1868 statement about seeing Jeremiah Stillwell riding north on December 11, 1867. Had Jeremiah killed his brother and fled, or had some third party killed Elias and forced Jeremiah to flee? Further examination of the remains revealed additional details. The medical examiner noted that the victim's right hand was missing entirely, apparently removed post-mortem with a sharp instrument. This unusual detail seemed ritualistic rather than practical, suggesting something more complex than a simple murder. The discovery of what appeared to be Elias Stillwell's remains prompted a renewed search of the area, but no trace of Jeremiah was found. If he had continued north after burying his brother, he had left no discernible trail. No trace of Jeremiah Stillwell or Joshua Hartley was ever found. Records from port cities were checked for any sign of him leaving the country, but if he had done so, he had used yet another assumed name. In 1958, a retired sheriff from Pike County, Illinois, contacted Thornton with an intriguing lead. In 1869, approximately a year after the Stillwell brothers' disappearance, a man matching Jeremiah's description had been briefly detained in Pittsfield, Illinois, for questioning regarding a suspicious death at a boarding house where he had been staying. The man, who called himself Jeremy Stilson, was released when witnesses provided him with an alibi. He left town immediately after and was never seen again. This tantalizing clue suggested that Jeremiah might have continued his predatory behavior after leaving Missouri, though perhaps with greater caution and without a partner. However, the trail went cold after Pittsfield, with no further sightings or records that could be definitively linked to the missing brother. In 1967, exactly 100 years after the brothers' disappearance, the Webster County Historical Society erected a small marker near where the cabin had once stood. The plaque makes no mention of the brothers' crimes, stating only, "Site of Stillwell Cabin, 1863 to 1868. Scene of unsolved disappearances that haunted the Ozarks frontier." The site itself has long since returned to wilderness, the cabin having collapsed sometime in the early 1900s. Local residents still avoid the area after dark, claiming that sounds of digging can sometimes be heard on still nights and that the well occasionally produces echoes when nothing has been dropped into it. The centennial of the case brought renewed media attention. The Springfield News Leader ran a week-long series on the Stillwell brothers, incorporating all the research and discoveries made since the original investigation. The article sparked public interest in the case, leading to several people coming forward with family stories or documents that added minor details to the historical record. One particularly valuable contribution came from the descendants of Dr. William Hayes, the county physician who had examined the remains found on the Stillwell property. His granddaughter provided Thornton with a journal Hayes had kept, which included more detailed notes about his findings than had been included in the official reports. Hayes had written that he was recording these observations separately from his official report, as their nature was too disturbing for public consumption. The preparation of human remains found in the smokehouse showed evidence of specialized knowledge. Most disturbingly, there was evidence that selection was not random. Certain parts were clearly preferred over others, suggesting a ritualistic or preferential aspect to the brothers' consumption patterns. These private notes confirmed what many had suspected but few had been willing to state explicitly. The Stillwell brothers had not merely killed and robbed their victims, but had processed and consumed their remains with deliberate methodology, suggesting a level of depravity beyond simple murder for profit. The meat was not merely cut from bone, but processed with techniques one might expect from a trained butcher or medical professional. Certain organs appeared to have been carefully removed and preserved separately. In 1968, a retired postal worker named Harold Weston, great-grandson of Thomas Weston, who had discovered the abandoned cabin, donated a box of his ancestors' personal papers to the Webster County Historical Society. Among these was a journal Thomas Weston had kept during his later years. An entry dated April 17, 1882, contained a startling confession. He wrote that he had carried this secret for 15 years but found he could not take it to his grave. What he told the sheriff about discovering the Stillwell place abandoned was not the whole truth. He had stopped there many times before, always alone, always careful. That final day, he arrived to find Elias dead at the table, his face in his stew. Jeremiah held a gun, shaking like a leaf. He said he was going to tell, said he couldn't live with it anymore. He made Weston help him load Elias onto a horse. They rode north together until they found a suitable place to bury him. Jeremiah gave him a gold watch and $50 to keep quiet, then said he was heading for Oregon Territory. Weston wrote that he had not seen him since and asked God to forgive him for his silence and complicity. This confession, if accurate, answered some questions while raising others. It explained the abandoned meal and Elias's disappearance, but not why Jeremiah had left all his belongings behind. It also implicated Thomas Weston in a cover-up, casting doubt on other aspects of his testimony. Most significantly, it suggested a rift between the brothers that had led to violence. Elias apparently wanting to confess their crimes, with Jeremiah choosing to silence him rather than face justice. This human element added a new layer to the case, suggesting that even among such depraved individuals, conscience could occasionally surface with deadly consequences. Further entries in Weston's journal provided additional context. He wrote of having stopped at the Stillwell cabin numerous times during his postal route, often accepting meals from the brothers. He confessed he never suspected the true nature of their stew and consumed it with relish, complimenting them on its rich flavor. The thought of how many poor souls had passed his lips in those meals tormented him nightly. Weston also described conversations with Jeremiah after Elias's death as they rode north with the body. According to his account, Jeremiah spoke of their history, revealing that they had begun their crimes in Kentucky after their parents died, leaving them destitute. What had started as grave robbing for valuables had evolved into something far more sinister when they discovered they could profit from both the possessions and remains of their victims. Weston wrote that Jeremiah spoke of it so matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather or crop prices. He said they'd perfected their methods over the years, learning which herbs would make travelers sleepy without affecting the taste of the food. He seemed proud of their efficiency, how they'd left no witnesses until Elias's conscience began to trouble him. Weston's journal ended abruptly in 1883, suggesting he may have died soon after recording these confessions. His account provided the most direct evidence yet of what had happened to the Stillwell brothers, though it could not be independently verified a century later. Historians and crime researchers continue to debate the full truth of the Stillwell case. Some suggest that Jeremiah killed his brother to end their killing spree, perhaps developing a conscience that Elias lacked. Others propose that the brothers had an accomplice who turned on them, possibly another traveler who discovered their true nature. The most disturbing theory, supported by some evidence from the recovered papers, is that the brothers were not only killing and robbing travelers but had developed a ritual around consuming their victims, a practice they extended to their unwitting guests by serving human flesh in their stews. Dr. Hayes's original notes included observations about certain bones showing evidence of having been broken open to extract marrow, a practice not typically used in conventional meat processing. The brothers' purchase of unusual amounts of preserving agents and spices, noted by Martha Simmons, suggests they may have been masking the true nature of the meat they served. In 1969, a team from the anthropology department at the University of Missouri examined the photographs and description of the remains found on the Stillwell property. Their analysis concluded that the processing methods used showed remarkable consistency and anatomical knowledge, supporting the theory that the brothers had developed specific techniques over time, possibly refining them through multiple iterations. The anthropologists also noted that the removal of certain body parts appeared selective rather than random, with particular attention paid to muscle groups from the thighs, shoulders, and back, cuts that would be considered prime in traditional butchery. This selective approach suggested not only practical knowledge but a ritualized or preferential aspect to their consumption of human flesh. The Missouri State Police officially closed the Stillwell case in 1969, classifying it as solved, despite the absence of a trial or definitive proof of what became of Jeremiah Stillwell. The official conclusion was that the brothers had killed at least 21 travelers between 1863 and 1867, robbing them of valuables and processing their remains for consumption and to dispose of evidence. Throughout the 1970s, interest in the case occasionally resurged when similar crimes were discovered elsewhere in the country. Comparisons were drawn to other historical cases of cannibalism and serial murder, with criminologists using the Stillwell case as a study in how isolated environments and transient victims created opportunities for predators to operate undetected for extended periods. In 1972, a historical researcher named Eleanor Phillips discovered an intriguing connection while examining Oregon territorial records. A man named Jerome Stillman had purchased land near Portland in 1869, establishing a small way station for travelers heading to and from the city. The physical description matched what was known of Jeremiah Stillwell, and the timing aligned with Thomas Weston's claim that Jeremiah had headed for Oregon territory. Phillips found that Stillman had operated his way station for approximately 3 years before selling the property and disappearing from records. During that time, at least 2 travelers had been reported missing after being seen heading toward his property, though no investigation appeared to have connected these disappearances to Stillman. This discovery suggested that Jeremiah might have continued his predatory behavior after fleeing Missouri, though perhaps with greater caution and a quicker willingness to move on when suspicions arose. The pattern fit with what was known of the brothers' earlier movements through Kentucky, Illinois, and Missouri, establishing themselves in relatively isolated locations, preying on travelers, and relocating when necessary. However, the trail went cold after Stillman sold his Oregon property in 1872. If Jeremiah Stillwell had adopted yet another identity, he had done so without leaving records that could be connected to his previous personas. Whether he eventually faced justice, died of natural causes, or continued his crimes under another name remains unknown. The final whereabouts of Jeremiah Stillwell remain a mystery. If Thomas Weston's belated confession was accurate, Jeremiah headed to Oregon territory. Records from that region show several men of similar description arriving between 1868 and 1870, but none who can be conclusively identified as the missing brother. In 1975, during renovations to a historical building in Sacramento, California, workers discovered a cache of documents hidden in a wall cavity. Among these was a journal belonging to a man who identified himself only as J.S., dating from 1873 to 1878. The journal described its author's life as a cook in a mining camp in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Certain passages in the journal raised disturbing parallels to the Stillwell case. The author wrote of special techniques for preparing meat and secret ingredients that made his stews particularly flavorful. He mentioned that miners occasionally disappeared from the camp, but such occurrences were common and rarely investigated thoroughly. Most tellingly, an entry from 1877 stated, "Sometimes I miss E in our cabin in the hills." He was weak at the end, but for years we perfected our craft together. The guests never suspected what nourishment they received at our table. Here, I must be more cautious, but the opportunities remain plentiful. While this journal could not be definitively linked to Jeremiah Stillwell, the similarities were striking enough that some researchers believe it provides evidence that he continued his murderous activities in California after leaving Oregon. The journal ended abruptly in October 1878 with no indication of what became of its author. The Stillwell case stands as one of the darkest chapters in Ozark history, a tale of frontier isolation, opportunistic predation, and unthinkable horror masked by simple hospitality. It reminds us that in the vast wilderness of post-Civil War America, travelers put their lives in the hands of strangers with every stop they made. Today, the land where the Stillwell cabin once stood is private property, unmarked and unvisited. The well, according to local sources, was filled in during the 1970s after several animals were found dead nearby. The water apparently contaminated by something seeping from the surrounding soil. The stretch of road that once brought travelers to the brothers' door has long since been rerouted. The old path barely visible now as a depression in the forest floor. Nature has reclaimed the scene of these historic horrors, covering them with new growth. But the earth remembers what happened there, even if human memory fades. In 1980, the Webster County Historical Society conducted an archaeological survey of the Stillwell property, hoping to find additional evidence that might shed light on unanswered questions. The foundation of the cabin was still visible, as were the collapsed remains of the root cellar and smokehouse. Excavation revealed few new insights, but soil samples taken from around the well showed unusually high concentrations of human bone fragments, suggesting that the brothers had disposed of remains there over an extended period. The archaeologists also found evidence of a previously undiscovered pit approximately 50 yards behind the smokehouse, which contained a layer of ash and charred bone fragments, indicating that some remains had been burned rather than processed or buried. These findings confirmed the brothers' methodical approach to disposing of evidence. They appeared to have used multiple methods, processing some remains for consumption, burying others, burning some, and disposing of yet others in the well, making it unlikely that all their victims would ever be identified or accounted for. The archaeological team also discovered a small tin box buried beneath what had been the cabin's hearth. Inside was a daguerreotype photograph of two young men standing beside an older couple, presumably their parents. On the back was written, Ezekiel and Joshua Hartley with mother and father 1848. This confirmed the brothers' original identities and provided the only known image of them. The photograph showed two ordinary-looking young men, Ezekiel, later Elias, with a serious expression, and Joshua, later Jeremiah, with what appeared to be a slight smile. Nothing in their appearance hinted at the depravity they would later exhibit, a reminder that monsters often wear unremarkable faces. In a final eerie postscript to this case, a historian researching Missouri Civil War records in 1961 discovered that a Union patrol had briefly stopped at a cabin matching the Stillwell property's location in October 1863. Shortly after the brothers had established themselves there, the patrol leader's report mentioned accepting a meal from two Kentucky men recently settled and noted that 3 of his men fell ill afterward, though all recovered. Had this been an early unsuccessful attempt by the brothers to claim victims? If so, it suggests their methodology evolved over time, becoming more effective and leaving fewer survivors to raise alarms. The patrol leader, Lieutenant James Morley, wrote that he found the brothers oddly hospitable given the tensions in the region and noted that their cabin seemed unusually well appointed for men so recently settled. He described a meal of hearty stew with meat of indeterminate origin and observed that the brothers seemed disappointed when the patrol announced their intention to continue their journey rather than camp for the night. This account, combined with the brothers' known history in Kentucky, suggests that they had arrived in Missouri with their murderous intentions already formed, wasting little time in attempting to continue their predatory activities. The fact that the patrol members survived might indicate that the brothers were still refining the herbs or poisons they later used to incapacitate their victims. In 1985, a doctoral student researching historical criminal psychology interviewed several elderly residents of Webster County who had grown up hearing stories about the Stillwell brothers. One recurring theme in these accounts was the brothers' apparent interest in folk medicine and herbal preparations. Martha Applegate, 93 at the time of the interview, recalled stories her grandmother had told her. Grandma said the younger brother would come to town asking about plants that grow in these hills. He had a particular interest in ones that caused drowsiness or confusion. Claimed it was for helping with his brother's headaches, but folks later wondered if they weren't using those plants on their visitors. This interest in medicinal or poisonous plants aligned with the brothers' known background. Joshua Hartley had worked briefly as a doctor's assistant in Kentucky before being dismissed, potentially gaining knowledge of both anatomy and pharmaceuticals. The brothers may have combined this formal knowledge with local folk traditions to develop methods for subduing their victims without struggle. Analysis of the brothers' purchasing patterns at Martha Simmons's general store showed regular acquisition of herbs and substances that, while individually innocuous, could potentially be combined to create sedative compounds. Items like valerian root, certain mushroom varieties, and large quantities of alcohol could have been used to create preparations that would make travelers drowsy or compliant. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Stillwell case is not what we know, but what remains unknown. How many travelers simply vanished on those remote Ozark roads, their disappearances never connected to the murderous brothers? How many families never learned the fate of loved ones who set out on journeys and never arrived? And somewhere, perhaps, descendants of Jeremiah Stillwell live on, unaware of their ancestors' dark legacy or carrying secrets of their own. In 1992, the case received renewed attention when a true crime author published The Stillwell Brothers, America's Forgotten Predators, a comprehensive examination of the case incorporating all known evidence and theories. The book became a regional bestseller and sparked interest in the case among a new generation. Following the book's publication, a woman from Northern California contacted the author with an intriguing family story. Her great-grandfather had operated a boarding house in Sacramento in the late 1870s. Among his tenants was a middle-aged man who worked as a cook at various establishments around the city. This man, who called himself John Smith, was described as polite but reclusive. According to family lore, Smith died suddenly in 1879 of what appeared to be a stroke. When the boarding house owner cleaned out his room, he found a locked trunk containing various personal items, including several watches, rings, and other valuables that seemed inconsistent with Smith's modest lifestyle. Also in the trunk was a journal containing entries that disturbed the boarding house owner so deeply that he burned it after reading only a few pages. The woman believed, based on the timing and description, that John Smith might have been Jeremiah Stilwell in his final identity. While this connection cannot be proven, it presents a plausible end to Jeremiah's story, dying anonymously in California, his true identity and horrific crimes known only to himself. If this account is accurate, it suggests that Jeremiah Stilwell eluded justice throughout his life, taking the full truth of his crimes to his grave. The known victims represent only those who could be connected to the brothers through the evidence found at their Missouri cabin, likely a fraction of their total victims across multiple states and identities. The sound of water still echoes in that deep well, even filled with earth. The whispers of the past never truly fade in places where such darkness once dwelled. For those who know the story, passing through the Missouri Ozarks still brings a shiver of awareness, a reminder that not all who offered hospitality to weary travelers did so with pure intentions. In 2004, an episode of a popular television series on historical crimes featured the Stilwell case, bringing it to national attention. The show included interviews with historians, criminologists, and descendants of Webster County residents who had been involved in the original investigation. One particularly poignant segment featured an elderly woman whose great-grandfather had disappeared while traveling through Missouri in 1866. His name had been found in the Stilwell ledger, confirming a family suspicion that had persisted for generations. She said that all those years they wondered what happened to him, and now they knew, though the truth was more horrible than anything they had imagined. The Stilwell brothers' crimes, while shocking, were made possible by the unique conditions of their time and place. The post-Civil War frontier offered perfect conditions for predators, isolated locations, transient populations, limited law enforcement, and the chaos of a society rebuilding after conflict. Travelers often had no choice but to rely on the hospitality of strangers, creating vulnerability that the brothers exploited mercilessly. Their methodology, offering food and shelter to weary travelers, using their victims' remains as food for subsequent victims, collecting trophies in their hidden chamber, suggests a level of depravity that transcends simple financial motivation. While they certainly profited from their crimes, taking valuables from their victims, the brothers seem to have derived a more profound satisfaction from their power over life and death and from their secret knowledge of what they were serving their guests. Criminologists who have studied the case note that the brothers' behavior shows elements of what would now be classified as serial killing, though with pragmatic components unusual in modern cases. Their preference for travelers as victims shows an understanding of opportunity and risk management that allowed them to operate undetected for years. The fact that they served their victims' remains to subsequent travelers adds a layer of psychological complexity that continues to disturb those who study the case. Was this practical disposal of evidence a perverse form of humor or something more ritualistic? The brothers left no explicit explanation of their motivations, leaving researchers to speculate based on their actions and the few writings that survived. Today, the Stilwell case is taught in criminology classes as an example of historical serial murder and as a demonstration of how different environmental factors can shape criminal behavior. The isolated setting, the transient nature of the victims, and the limited forensic capabilities of the era created conditions that would be difficult to replicate in modern times. Yet, the fundamental horror of the case remains timeless: the violation of the sacred trust between host and guest, the exploitation of human vulnerability, and the revelation that monsters often wear human faces, offering water to the thirsty and rest to the weary while harboring unimaginable darkness within. The land where the Stilwell cabin once stood has been reclaimed by nature. The physical evidence of their crimes long since decayed or removed. But the story endures, a cautionary tale passed down through generations, a reminder of humanity's capacity for both hospitality and horror. And somewhere in the Missouri Ozarks, where the old road once passed, travelers still sometimes report an unexplained unease, a sudden chill in the air, as if the land itself remembers what transpired there. Brothers who served more than water to weary travelers, whose true legacy was written in blood and bone rather than historical records. For those who know the tale, the lesson remains clear: not all who offer shelter from the storm have benevolent intentions. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who smile and invite you in from the cold, offering a hot meal and a place to rest your head.